So I was thinking about this hard problem of what does it mean, or how can you, if I was starting up again, right from the get-go, what would I actually do? What is the sort of step-by-step nature? I have a series of people in my life that are at a stage where they're kind of, beginning, and beginning their life in terms of being sort of an adult. They're sort of moving away and getting jobs and all of that kind of stuff. And um, I was thinking about that. This is a really great problem to pursue. And it's really interesting. I was thinking, reflecting on what I did and what I would do differently. So the key thing is, and it comes back to this, as I'm always talking about, is to be confident with who you are as a person. And when you see other people that are giving you, and I realize the irony with this, giving you advice, just kind of smile and nod when you see that. And I want to talk about, there's some things. There's so many people that are trying to sell you, and they're trying to do things that essentially will probably, ruin your life in various different ways, and they're just looking out for themselves, right? That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to hopefully make sure that you are going to do well in your life. And the key thing is doing well in your life. It's a slow and painful process. It takes a long, long time. And in fact, it's not that painful if you just kind of enjoy what you're actually doing and smile along the way. That's the key thing, right? Like smiling along the way. There are a couple of moments that I'm like, oh, that was a really dumb decision in my life. Buying getting a car lease, a brand new car lease when we're first starting out, that was dumb. That was absolutely dumb decision. Now what we end up doing is we just buy our cars. We either buy a used car that's a couple years old, we just pay it straight out, right? Like we save up the money and buy this thing out. My latest car that I have, we just bought it out. We saved and bought. So, what is it? What can you actually do? How can you actually do this kind of stuff? And why should you actually do that? The reason is, it's just, I want you to feel good about yourself, right? Like anytime that you're owing to somebody else, that you are trapped, right? You've signed some sort of contract. It's going to feel trapped, where you have to um, abide to somebody else. And that is a tricky thing to sort of deal with and to process in your head, because no matter what happens, you owe them something. Now, on the other side, right, thinking about jobs, I'm not necessarily as good in terms of the negotiation and all that kind of stuff, but having just a decent, solid job, I think is pretty good. Um, I could be far better in terms of negotiating, finding out my career, getting better salaries, all of that kind of stuff. I realize that, but part of me is also thinking like, um, and I know that the evidence is against this, right? So part of me is like, I just couldn't be bothered, but the evidence is that if you negotiate and you're kind of aggressive with things, that you end up getting better deals over the long run, right? Like far better deals. Um, and you do make more money and all of that kind of stuff. You better careers, all of that kind of stuff. So if you're that kind of aggressive person, go nuts. Me, I am, I worry about it and I think about it, but I'm not that kind of person. And I think, my wife and I are pretty well matched in this kind of regard. Um, but in general, what I focus on is, not necessarily that. I mean, that's important, right? Like lobbying, making sure you're getting more salary in your life. Better salaries and wages always matters. But on the other side, you can try to get your life together in a solid foundation. And all of that stuff is super boring and nobody ever wants to talk about it, right? Nobody's going to give you sound advice, right? So there is just getting basic life. So don't get life insurance unless you actually have a dependent. So what is a dependent? Somebody that's old that you pay for, or somebody that's young that you pay for. Everything else is a waste of money. They're trying to sell you this stuff. And then you just need basic life insurance called term life insurance. And you get that for like 20 years, 25 years. Um, Basically just covers if something would, if you're to die, what would that actually look like? What do? You get like 10 times the amount. Why do you get 10 times or slightly over 10 times the amount? That's what the rate of the stock market, that's how quickly, or that's what it's growing at. And if you get 10% off that thing, then you're pretty good, right? You always have that sort of principle that's stuff that's always there, that's paying for you. So, beyond that kind of stuff, in America, you have to worry about healthcare insurance, get the basic, solid healthcare insurance. I'm part of my work plan. That's just a solid plan. No sort of gimmicky kind of stuff, but just a solid one that I don't have to worry about healthcare stuff. Um, you know, all of those things, and then thinking about just basic day-to-day life stuff, right? Like getting your teeth cleaned once a year, right, is an important thing, but it feels like, man, I shouldn't do this thing, is taking away from what I'm actually doing. But all of that stuff is very important. Basic boring stuff is very important, and making that part of your life is super super important over the long run. So, what you're going to face almost always is you're going to think in your head, I can't afford this. I can't justify this thing. I don't. And it's not I can't afford it. Later on, it becomes I don't have time for this, right? For brushing your teeth, for getting your teeth cleaned, that kind of, it's very simple stuff. But what you're doing is you're making a trade-off. In the long run, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt. So that's why you want to just kind of get into the practice of always doing those sort of simple things over the long run, right? And so how can you actually become, quote unquote, highly successful in the long run? Just keep reinvesting. That's it. Take 10%, 15%. My wife and I are probably 15 to 20%. Excuse me. 15 to 20% of everything we make, everything we do, our time and effort is reinvested in various different things, right? So whether it is, um, we invest time in our kids, right? That's important. In fact, probably almost all of our resources are invested somehow in growing things in some sort of way. We do very little like of our own, um, just for our own pleasure. We do more of that now, but in general, if you get used to that, right, like doing things for just the pleasure of it and investing for the long run, it shifts who you are and it shifts what you're thinking about. Let me explain this, right? So often we think in terms of consumption, right? We want to get this thing. We want we want this car. We want this house, whatever. But if you gradually move your mind towards thinking about growing things around you, you see all sorts of potential. And the growing, it's like farming, right? The farming is not necessarily something you do get. You get a yield every year, right? Which is really nice. But the yield, what you're really looking at is how can you grow your farm so you have an amazing yield in 20 years, right? And that requires just working, plugging away at things, making sure that you're always kind of doing things repeatedly. And if you kind of get into that I'm just puttering around doing things in this little area, that little area, and you're always doing things where you're growing little bits of stuff all around you, right? And you're thinking about how can I grow this thing, right? So you might think about, hey, I have these skills. How can I grow that? Well, maybe I take a course. Maybe I do, a couple of things here. I've got eventually you might want to have, a family and kids and stuff. Um, so then you think, well, how can I grow that? Well, then let's spend some time doing homework with them. Let's sit down at the table. Let's walk them through things. Every once in a while, we have an awkward, weird conversation about stuff um, that they're going to sort of experience in their life, right? That's a weird, awkward, goofy conversation. Like just those little things where you're thinking about how can I grow? What is it that will benefit these little things that are going on in your life, right? And ultimately, at the end, um, these sort of little growth things that pans out, right? And that's I'm thinking in my head. I think like shifting my mind towards. So for me, I was like so gung ho about making this happen right away, right? Like it's gotta happen right away. And I'm gonna do all this kind of stuff. It's gonna be wonderful. It did pan out, right? But um, I should have been more relaxed with it and realized that it just takes time. It's a one little thing. You do a little thing here, a little thing there, and things just kind of happen. It doesn't happen like that what you see on TV, all of a sudden something sort of miraculous happens. It's not what happens. It's just like all of a sudden it just is there, and you never realized it would be there, whatever that particular thing is. Whether it's it, you know, uh, having family or all these kind of things. It just gradually, slowly happens over time where you are just growing things. And my God, yes, there are times where it hails and your whole crop just gets disappeared, right? But you get back up and you get going again. You're like, well, that's next year, right? I'll just work on it next year. And you just keep getting back up, right? And the name of the game is to repeatedly keep growing whatever you're looking at, and 10 to 20%, whatever that is, of everything in your life is always being reinvested somehow, right? Whatever particular category it is, there's a little bit of sort of reaping the benefits of different aspects of it, but then there's always these sort of little growth things that you're doing that, really do pan out. But it takes an awful long time, and you just have to realize that. That's it. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.